In Canada and the United States, military ambitions, along with the pursuit of technological innovation, led to the emergence of the nuclear industry, which materialized the nuclear chain of events, a process that ranges from the extraction, processing, weaponization, consumption, and disposal of uranium. As observed by Indigenous activist and author Winnoa LaDuke in the 5th chapter of her book, All of Relations, the externalities of these processes have had disproportionate impact on Indigenous communities across and beyond Turtle Island. Indigenous anti-nuclear activists speak of nuclear colonialism. The violence of nuclear colonialism has taken on multiple forms, from the irreversible contamination of ecosystems, population displacement, land disposition, and long-term latent health impacts. As contend anthropologist Nader and Gustafson, this violence operates through secrecy, externalization, exclusion, and mass numbing. They observe how it has been enacted through governmental policies that deliberately sustain the invisibility of the devastating effects of nuclear material on people, land, water, fauna, and flora, and how abuse is rationalized in the name of national interest. As designers, acknowledging these issues as not isolated or distinct to the practice of architecture, but rather as formative of the way we practice and envision futures, is essential. Through our ability to design, we bear responsibility in engaging with the discussion of how we should collectively consider our nuclear heritage. Notably, imagining means by which to make these challenges accessible is something we can contribute. Sustaining visibility, as opposed to sustained invisibility, is a way we can care. As believe anti-nuclear activists as Faye Brown, Virginia Sanchez, Judy Da Silva, and Marlene Bulcree, crucial issues such as our complex relationship with nuclear waste, which engages current as well as future generations, should be addressed collectively and publicly. As Faye Brown observes, it's a way to engage this country in a larger political debate on how we're going to meet this country's energy needs. In recent decades, the increasing urgency for carbon emission reduction has renewed interest in nuclear energy. In the United States, this resumed interest has prompted discussions over license renewals, which allow for the extensions of aging reactor operation. As so, several license renewals which would extend the operational lives of several nuclear reactors well into the mid-21st century are pending. Considering nuclear energy only in terms of its low carbon emissions overlooks its own distinct wastes, most notably the highly radioactive waste produced by nuclear reactors, which will remain dangerous for thousands of years, demands long-term waste management strategies. In the United States, spent fuel has been accumulating on the sites of nuclear power plants. This condition is due to the federal government's inability to legislate a national repository. With no long-term repository in either the US or Canada, power plants across Turtle Island currently rely on perpetual renewed, temporary, independent spent fuel storage installations, or ISFSIs. Nuclear power plants require a network of facilities to host the process of energy production. Energy production is achieved in reactors with fuel rods, which become highly radioactive and reach soaring temperatures upon their use in nuclear fission. Water-based cooling systems moderate the heat outputs of the fission process. In general, fuel rod assemblies have a lifespan of 12 to 18 months, after which they are left to cool down in pools adjacent to reactors for between 5 to 10 years. The flow of water required for the cooling systems of both reactors and spent fuel pool depends on an uninterrupted power supply, even when not producing electricity themselves. An independent switchyard along with several backup generators are always located on site to prevent any blackouts. Alternatively to wet storage, power plants often have dedicated areas for dry storage, in which sufficiently cooled fuel rods assemblies can be stored in casks, which do not require constant cooling. While all these facilities are over-engineered, extended road connections often remain the weakest link in this interdependent network of infrastructure. Access to the facilities should be thought of as being as vital as their ability to operate under duress. With the increasing occurrence of extreme weather events, sea level rise and land shifts tied to the effects of climate change, the precarity of nuclear waste accumulating by water-dependent reactors has come to draw significant attention from both environmental groups and regulatory agencies. Notably, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster of 2011 has highlighted the risks of water acting as both a volatile, disruptive force and a vector of radiation. According to a 2022 NOAA report, an increase of 1 foot will invariably occur by 2050, and sea levels could reach up to 7 feet by 2100. As Natalie Kopitko notes in her 2009 thesis, The Adaptation Mitigation Dilemma, these changes in water levels will increase and exacerbate storm surges and coastal erosions. Nuclear power plants along the Pacific and Atlantic coasts will be the most affected by sea level rise, as a plant blackout could lead to radiation leaks. Over-engineering, or hardening rather than retreat, has become the norm in response to increasing extreme weather events and sea level rise. The accumulating waste stored in spent fuel pools and dry casks, along with the delays associated with plant decommissioning, are issues worth consideration in the context of sea level rise. Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulations for decommissioning of nuclear power plants allow for up to 60 years, safe storage plus decontamination, that can be shortened down to 10 years, at higher costs and risks, as storage periods allow for certain radioactive material to safely decay, reducing risk of worker exposure to radiation. With the looming prospect of accelerating sea level rise, failing to act in time could make safe decommissioning and the evacuation of dangerous nuclear waste difficult, perhaps even impossible. Of 16 coastal nuclear power plants, we've identified 5 cases worth consideration. Humboldt Nuclear Power Plant in California operated between 1977 and 1988. While decommissioned and decontaminated in 2021, spent fuel and dry casks remain on site. By 2083, all access roads will be submerged, limiting access to any dry casks remaining on site. Crystal River Nuclear Power Plant in northern Florida operated between 1977 and 2013. While decommissioned in 2013, its installations along with its spent fuel and dry casks remain on site. By 2091, all access roads will be submerged, limiting access to the installations and the dry casks. Turkey Point Nuclear Power Plant in southern Florida came online in 1972. By 2070, the main access road to the plant will be inundated, with plant decontamination taking on average at least 10 years. This would mean the decontamination process will have to begin at the latest 2065. Salem Nuclear Power Plant on the Delaware River in New Jersey first came online in 1972. Its latest reactor, Hope Creek Unit 1, is licensed to operate until 2046. Considering the minimal 10-year average for plant decommission, conflict becomes evident with the operation period of Hope Creek Unit 1. Decommission by road will have to begin at least in 2040, 6 years before the end of Hope Creek Unit 1's licensed operation. By 2100, water would significantly encroach on the site of the nuclear power plant. Decommission by barge would have to begin at the latest in 2090. Finally, St. Lucie Nuclear Power Plant, located on a sandbar on the Atlantic Floridian coast, began operation in 1976, and a pending license renewal would allow for its operation until 2063. By 2050, with 1 foot of sea level rise, water will surround access roads. Again, considering 10 years average minimum for decontamination, The process would have to begin by 2056, conflicting with the operation period that would allow the pending license renewal. These cases, while without conflict, are nonetheless indicative of how permanent renewal of temporary spent fuel storage is not a sustainable strategy for dealing with nuclear waste. In the context of climate change, the critical position of coastal nuclear power plants remains widely underaddressed in governmental action plans, while the reality of narrowing timeframes for decommissioning and increasing quantities of spent fuel accumulating on sites are undeniable. This condition is most likely to provoke serious complications, or even potential harm in the near future if projections of sea level rise remain underestimated. The issue also leads to consider, where will all this waste go? Or perhaps, where is elsewhere? Given the ongoing legacy of nuclear colonialism, how might the pressures of climate change exacerbate the challenges of reconciliation? Is the idea of disposal only conceivable in the colonial context? As designers, the ability to operate within contexts of increasing risk and uncertainty, as the critical position of coastal nuclear power plants, is equally underaddressed. With a narrow focus on mimetic and punctual solutions, architectural curriculum's concerns with climate action only in terms of carbon emissions fails to prepare tomorrow's designers for the multiple fronts upon which climate change will disrupt our ability to design and envision better futures. While climate change undoubtedly aggravates issues such as our precarious relationship to nuclear waste, as attests Winnie Leduc's All Relations, struggles for land and life are continuous rather than episodic. Relational modes of engagement can be a meaningful first step in challenging scope neglect in architectural education.
About 1978, we found that there were high radium contents in the river, and we pressured the government through various tactics into building a radium removal plant, which you see here. Now, the unfortunate part about that is that they wouldn't provide the water for the Indians on the other side of the river who take water from here too. They only provided it for the white settlement. That didn't make an awful lot of sense, so when we argued and investigated that, they said, well, Indians are federal matter and white people are provincial matter, so that the white community gets treated water, the Indian community doesn't. It's supposed to be not safe on this side, but it's safe on the other side.
So the Indians still don't have good water?
The best of my knowledge, the Indians still either take the water from the river or take it from other sources like wells, which tend to be contaminated too. And they've been told in writing not to drink the water from here, nor to eat the fish from here.
Well, where are they supposed to get their water?
That's a good question, I think.